Hey, welcome one and all to episode 69 of Hightailing Through History, a history podcast where two sisters get stoned and surprise each other with a story from history's vault of the weird and the wonderful. I'm your... It's not like a carnival barker. I'm your... welcome one and all. I'm your carnival barker, older sister,
I can
Laurel.
guess your weight just by looking at you, or age, or whatever they do.
Rude. I know. You're like, go over there with your inflatable hammers and your fluffy gorillas. Go with your wooden bottles and your air guns. Get out of here. Guessing my weight. Rude as hell. Anyway, I'm Laurel, the older sister.
I'm Katie. Leaving me to be the younger sister.
We have a very special episode here for you at the request of my sister and co-host, Katie. When we saw episode 69 looming ahead on the calendar, we're like, we're going to grab this opportunity. It's a topic so big, so deep, that we might as well be covering like the history of humanity or something, you know?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Tonight, guys, gals, pals, we are chatting for a part one on the history of sex. And it's quite the topic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, so along with that, we'd also like to thank you for your assistance over on social media at Instagram. When we decided to do this topic, we're like, well, we're going to go through a general timeline of humanity and history and look at some different cultures or different eras that are popular that, their attitudes towards sex or practices and things like that. But since it's such a huge umbrella and there are dozens, nay, scores of subtopics when it comes to sexuality, that we're like, well, what do you, the good people, want to know? And so we put some topics up over on Instagram. And would you believe that 6 of them were voted for equally by all the people? So that kind of backfired a little bit. But we're like, what are some things that you really want us to make sure that we hit on in each of these different eras and cultures? And they were sexual science in the 19th and 20th century, food, aphrodisiacs, how that's used in sex, contraception throughout history, sex work, erotica and pornography, and sex and hygiene. So there we are. So that's our plan. So that way you are along for the ride and know that you know what you're getting into. And we're going to pretty much go through a general timeline of humanity, ending with the Middle Ages tonight, and then looking at some of those specific subtopics along the way. Hey, but first, before we all jump into bed together, what are we imbibing in today?
Raspberry leaf tea, because I'm so exciting.
Yeah, I'm glad you're feeling better, Katie.
Yeah, I'm working on it, so I'm just going to keep imbibing in my tea and, getting all healthy and being all boring until then. Probably we'll follow it up with a hot toddy this evening, but... Whew.
Nice. That's good.
What about you? What is your pick of poison this evening?
Well, I will then be imbibing for the both of us. And I think looking at my eyes, you can tell. So I have an edible, and then I have a glass of 19 Crimes, the Cali Reds. This one was Snoop Dogg.
The one with Snoop, yeah.
Which you got me, so thank you. I got that. So I've got a little bit of everything going on, and that edible kicked in shortly before pressing record, which was a little bit premature. So
the face, you're like, oh no.
Here we go. All right. So with that all set, I hope you guys are all snuggled in and ready to go. Maybe you have a cup of tea or some snacks or a glass of wine or J or whatever it may be. But before we get started, we have to do a little medical disclaimer. Yeah, because in this episode, you're going to hear about a lot of different kinds of sexual science and medical methods regarding our reproductive systems. We are not doctors. I don't think even the people giving the advice then weren't doctors either.
No, I was going to say, especially when you hit those Middle Ages, like, do not follow any of what they said was a good idea. I was like,
yeah,
it's amazing anyone even made it out alive in those days sometimes. I was like, what?
Yeah. So we're not doctors, and we are certainly not giving any sort of medical advice. Please do not rely on any medical information that you hear in this episode, because actually, please don't rely on anything, because it's mostly the biggest bullshit. So please consult your doctor, a medical professional, if you have any concerns regarding your health. Now, Katie, I don't know about you, but I found the history of sex to be such a challenge to research.
Oh, yeah.
Not only because of how much there is to it, but also how much we don't always know.
Right.
You know, for the most part, when it comes to this subject, there are century-old layers of censorship, in sexual behaviors, and people routinely excluded from history. So when we're looking through these things, it's like, okay, was this written? Well, who was this written by? Is this written to excite and titillate, or is it to slander a certain person or group of peoples? Or is it written by the hand of somebody who wants to filter information through a specific agenda? Or, who are these people that are keeping these records? So for a lot of this, the only thing that we can research in a lot of ways are the police and court records, through erotica and pornography of the time period, and with medical texts. We're going to go really far back. It's going to get really old here. And I'm taking this all the way back 385 million years ago to the oldest evidence of penetrative intercourse. Hot.
Oh, Lord.
Primitive penetrative intercourse. And the fact, folks, actually, the reason why I'm particularly stoned this evening is because I realized that I was going to get super blushy, and
oh, really?
Yeah, when I was reading through this, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to look into a camera and say some of these things. And I know that I'm gonna have friends and family and people that are gonna be hearing some of this. And I was like, I didn't realize I was a little bit prudish, but I was kind of like, well, I'm kind of.
We are merely the relayers of this information. We didn't write it. That's all we're here for.
Well, yeah. So this is what's going on. So we're talking about some primitive penetrative intercourse here. And so, as you can imagine, I don't think you got a very sexy image in your head. It's
Probably
not that. It's not that sexy. And so, for those of you who are watching the podcast, watching the episode on Spotify or YouTube, if it is safe for you to do so, I would like you to meet Microbrachius Dickey.
Oh,
Dickey, I know, Dickey.
Who was in charge of that naming?
Well, I like to tell you about the man in a minute. He's great. So his last name's Dick. So spoiler. So the Microbrachius Dickey is a very primitive bony fish. It's kind of one of those armored fish, about 8 centimeters long, and lived 385 million years ago in the part of the world that we know now as Scotland.
Oh.
And it gets its wonderful name from 19th century Scottish baker turned botanist Robert Dick, how very 19th century of him.
I know, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, the tides have turned, okay.
I just like the thought that he's like rolling out some dough and he's like, I don't want to make doughy treats for people anymore. I want to go and be out to nature and be why that turned Irish all of a sudden.
It really did. You started decently strong and then it real quickly deteriorated. But the effort was there. The effort was there.
I'm sick and tired of all this dough.
He's had it with his yeasty morning.
Oh, sorry, Scotland. I think they just gave me a collective scream and a cuss. But but that was the guy's name, and he's out and he's digging. He finds this fossil, the one that later gets his name. And it wasn't until 2014 when Professor John Long at Flinders University in Australia, John Long, not Long John, and he puts all the pieces together when looking at an M. Dickey fossil.
This is not okay, the names of the people who are in charge of this shit. It's almost like fate set this up on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm typing it out going, all right.
Get out right now. All right, so what did Long John have to say?
So you see, there's a time before sex, when living things reproduced asexually, because to quote the super sexy Dr. Ian Malcolm, life finds a way, right?
Yes.
And biology and evolution happens and those processes go forth. And hundreds of millions of years later, the Microbrachius dicki is the organism that scientists can point to, at least at this time, now as I'm speaking, can point to and say, this is the moment of penetrative intercourse and internal fertilization. It's our earliest example.
Okay.
Cool. So Professor Long was looking at the male fossil and he found this little L-shaped appendage. And he later found out that that's the genitalia and would transfer sperm. Female fossils, ones that didn't have this little appendage on the other side of it, had this little, I don't know, kind of like a little appendage like that. So I'll put it back up here again. So if you guys are watching, you can see it. And that was, they says almost like Velcro. It would attach and lock the male appendage into place.
Interesting.
There would be a transfer sperm that way. The M. dicki mated side by side, and they like linked arms like it was a little sexy square dance. That picture's up now too. Like they do-si-doed side by side, and they did the little thing, and then they went back. Yeah.
Went their separate ways. Someday love may find them, but today they go their separate ways.
They take their own journey.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, good. I was so hoping you knew where I was going with that.
Now, fish went back to spawning, and that's when we then later see some sharks and rays that use internal fertilization again to a certain degree.
Actually, fun fact, do you know the biggest advantage of sexual reproduction versus asexual reproduction? Gene variation. So it meant it was our biggest combat against disease and like fungus, anything that could wipe out, because when you asexually reproduce, you are making an exact copy of yourself. With sexual reproduction, you swap genes and you don't know what you're going to end up with, right? Your parents could have blue eyes, but well, recessive, bad idea. But your parents could have brown eyes and you could have blue eyes because of the recessive gene, right? So the variety that created made us a lot hardier against disease and other things that would otherwise wipe out populations. So it's actually one of the biggest evolutionary advantages that ever came about was sexual reproduction.
Yeah.
And that's what I paid for in my education.
Nailed it. Crushed it right there.
Biology. Trying to make my teachers proud.
One day one of your professors is going to like hear this and he's going to just wipe a tear from his eyes. And just
I hope so.
But hey, I know you all aren't here to hear about prehistoric fish banging. And so let's move forward a little bit. Let's move to early humans. Now we know we don't necessarily have historical writings from this period of time, right? But we do have art in the form of cave painting and figurines. Yeah. Okay, so now our era of time that we're looking at is between 25,000 and 40,000 BCE, Upper Paleolithic period, Late Stone Age. This is a period in time when archaeologists are finding cave paintings in various parts of Asia and Europe and are finding pictures of animals, hunting, daily life, yes, but they're also occasionally finding some sexy images. Apparently.
The OG porno mags.
Hot. There's been multiple of them, multiple engraved and painted images of female sexual organs that have been found in a cave in southern France. And I say apparently because if you can see it right now on your screen, I've seen them and I can't make heads or tails or vulva from it. It's literally like line. There's like divot in the rock. So I don't see it, but hey, maybe that's just like my lack of interpretive eye there, but I'm no archaeologist, but that's what they say. And another thing that we also get from this period of time that we can make heads, tails, and vulvas from are the little figurines of the female form that were created. Commonly, these were referred to as Venus figures, although this is a name that we've given to them modern day, because it's not like they had a Venus or Aphrodite, you know.
Right.
That's Greek Roman mythology.
Venus, I'm your fire, pure desire. All right, sorry.
So these figures often have these really exaggerated breasts, hips, or like exaggerated breasts and sex organs. So like there's one part of it that's like almost really carved
But
big.
this right here, these labia, make this a lot bigger. But why? Just do it.
Academics have often interpreted these pieces as early erotica, like pornography to hold in your hands.
Oh, interesting. I wondered if it had something to do with like the importance of reproduction and then fertility being important. But
Mm.
oh,
No,
sorry.
no, you're good. You're totally right because I'm a little bit high. You want to hear me challenge that a little bit? Want to hear my hot take?
Sure.
Because
Sure.
it was like yours was.
Well, I
Like who
was being
said?
logical about it because
Right.
fertility was hard. Like, they didn't get 3 square meals a day back then. Your cycle wasn't always regular, and then you didn't always make it through pregnancy, birth. Like the babies didn't always make like that shit was hard back in the day.
Yeah.
So to me, I was like, well, I figured that was like, like the what would you say the vehicles of reproduction would then be of great importance. That's what I would take from that. But I would love to hear yours.
No, I'm right there with you. But I was just like, who says though? Who says that?
Right?
Who says they're for the I want to know.
Maybe the scientists are just horny nerds.
Well, they're like, it's for the 5-finger shuffle, the shucking the corn cob, shaking hands with the milkman.
God, don't talk about shucking corn like that.
But I was like, yeah, sure, they could be used for those things, like for that purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. Like, I'm not saying it's not, but I feel like there's a lot of assumptions there. They were made by men for men, or by women for men, or by men for, who makes them and by who. And and then that gives assumptions about homosexuality and heterosexuality, of like what early man's sexuality was like, if you're saying like this is what these were made for and this was the purpose. And then what if they were used for fertility or some sort of spiritual practice?
Right.
What if like the really exaggerated breast was like some sort of nod to the power of a woman's body to like feed the young
and bring life?
like bring life.
That's
like,
where I would go with it. So I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say they're wrong. Because I can do that because we co-host this podcast together, and guess what? Their opinion doesn't matter here, but mine does.
Can't wait for the mail on that one. That's good. But but also archaeologists have found flutes and sculptures, cave paintings, like various kinds of art, primitive art, but it's still art from that period. And so who's to say that like, hey, it's just really pretty little thing that we like and celebrates a body, like,
right?
Whatever. So when looking into prehistoric sex and Venus figures, I was glad, because of that thought process I had and those questions I had, I was glad to find an article from NPR in 2014 about anthropologists April Noel and Melanie L. Chang, who talked about exactly this, albeit with PhDs. So smarts. Big words.
So they're a little more qualified, some might say.
Yeah. So in addition to saying we don't actually know for sure, so we want to make sure that we're not making too many assumptions when interpreting history. But then they also brought up points about men aren't the only ones turned on by sexual imagery. And so that's why they're saying, like, who's to say that it's just for men? Like, maybe this is for women too, if that's the route you want to take. As well as then making presumptions of Paleolithic life through a modern lens. Oh, that's really challenging to say.
You got this.
Yeah.
Paleolithic life through a modern lens. Yeah, no, you nailed it.
Fuck yeah. And that they would treat nudity that the same way that we do today, because we're like, oh, titties, that they would have been just like, yeah, whatever.
Right. Like it was kind of more of like you didn't have as many ways to make garments and put them on yourself back then, so I feel like nudity would be a lot less of a deal. I feel like that's a very Western ideal. Know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
For sure, man. We're on the same page.
And then the figures aren't even all exactly the same. Because again, they're from different areas, but there are a lot of similarities. So there'd be some that might have like non-existent feet or legs or their arms. One of them, which is the Venus de Willendorf, she has her arms resting on top. and some of them are kind of like more skinny and narrow. Some of them are wider in certain places. So there is difference to them too. Noel and Chang also mentioned how these figures have been found in different types of locations at dig sites. So some are found in an area where there's evidence of a ritual practice or spiritual practice of some sort, while other ones have been found in areas where there's trash and rubble and refuse.
Those were the eroticas.
Yeah. Like, don't let anyone know what I'm doing with this one. And some were thought to be worn because they were finding evidence of like something where something could be looped through to be worn or pinned onto something or attached to something.
The midwives had all the breast disease on their ears, naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at the end of the day, all I'm really saying is some of the earliest art that history has is that of sex organs, lusty encounters, and big titties on tiny figurines. So that's...
dude, tiggle bitties, let me tell you what.
So she was saying, like, that's prevalent in academia about this subject, that, yeah, this is for erotic purposes. But they were like, well, are we sure about that? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a weird, like that
was not where my brain went first.
Yeah, of academics who study that would be like, yes, that's it. Versus some that might be like, well, as they say about other parts of history, we don't really know everything all the time. I don't know. I just feel like that was kind of a weird, hey, historians, let me know if I'm totally off base. But
I guess I would just, in the case of like a conversation with Dr. Reed about the animism and whatnot. And a lot of those, if you study those cultures and religions specifically, there's a lot of fertility gods and goddesses. So to me, fertility is an important thing because the continuation of a species is, like in my part, when we come to my section of it, I'll just quote the first. It says, any species needs 3 things to survive and thrive in this world: food, water, and reproduction. Like down to, that's a very broad basis, but it's a very important aspect of the survival of a species. So again, like I said, the vehicles of reproduction or genitalia, whatever you want to call them, like to me, I'm like, that would be where my mind would go first, is that they're, I don't know. I just figure they weren't as prudish as we were, so they wouldn't be like, oh, sexy time. Like, no, they would just literally go have sex. Like, I don't think it was, that's just my opinion though, just based upon experiences I've had with like certain cultures and stuff. And I was like, but what do I know? I'm just some stone in a basement with my sister on a podcast. So like, what the fuck do I know?
We're so self-important. No, but you're right. No,
trying to think logically about it to me, and that's where I ended up. But
the same thing. The same thing.
Maybe we give the ancients too much credit.
Yeah. Speaking of ancients, let's go forward into ancient Greece.
Get in.
Yeah. So like, here we go.
Nude statues. You want to talk about some nudies?
Snuggle in. Yeah. Feel the streamlight. Stream it down upon your face through the columns of the Parthenon, I guess. Can hear the hustle and bustle of the people going by through the agora. Trying to really set a scene here. It does not matter. But hey, look, when we look at the era of ancient Greeks, it's marked on the historical timeline as the period following the Mycenaeans, the Minoans before that, which ended about 1200 BCE, all the way up to the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE.
How old was he when he died? Do you know?
32?
You actually had an answer. I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember. I know his horse passed away before he did, but
Bucephalus.
I should do. You know what? Yes, Bucephalus. Which I should do an episode of famous horses in history.
I'm surprised you haven't already.
Great idea. Like, why the fuck haven't I?
I actually was like, I'm surprised that she's not done that yet.
We all just looked at each other like, how is this just being mentioned now? Oh man, I'm adding it to the list as we speak.
Okay. Nice. I talked about Alexander's dog, his Mastiff, in the History of Dogs episode briefly. And I think that's probably the only reason why I know that. Because I don't know that much about Alexander the Great. I definitely sounded like I did.
You're right. You did. I was impressed, but I also do not know that much about him.
The ancient Greeks knew their sex, though. All right.
Oh, they did.
They embraced their sexuality, and they had lots of it. Sex work flourished. Same-sex love and relationships were totally normal, although there are some asterisks attached to that, which we will talk about tonight. Eros, as it is called, is romantic and passionate love. It's the primal force of nature that permeates just about everything in ancient Greek culture. And in fact, so many words that pertain to love and sex and romance derive from ancient Greece. How about that? So we've got Eros, so like Cupid to the Romans, the god of love and sex, eroticism, nymphomania, pederasty. All of them are good words, and aphrodisiac. So those are just a handful, but we've got a lot of these that all root back to ancient Greece. So let's dig into these freaky ancient Greeks, shall we? Scroll. Okay. As I mentioned, the ancient Greek era came forth from the Mycenaeans, the Minoans before them, and the Mycenaeans had myths and legends that were passed on through the spoken word and later formed the basis of Greek tragedy theater and Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey.
There you go. Get him.
There we are. There it is. And when we look at Greek myth and legend, much of them revolve around various sexual or romantic encounters. Not all of them consensual. Zeus, looking at you.
Yes.
Apollo,
Zeus was
you too.
a bad one. One of my friends said after we studied Zeus in high school, she goes, honestly, if it wasn't nailed down and it held still long enough, Zeus was probably fucking it. I was like, damn, girl. And I was like,
yeah.
I was like, actually, I think if it was nailed down, he probably still, she goes, rocks, dude. Probably rocks.
Yeah.
So that's how we viewed Zeus in high school.
Well, it's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not an off-base opinion to have of him for sure. I feel like if a lot of your mythology, like your spiritual practice, your creation story, your stories for why the world works the way it works, if those are frequently rooted or at least infused in some way with sexy time and eroticism, or at minimal, like a flirtatious glance or something,
Yeah, very commonly.
But I think we have a lot to talk about when it comes to your culture and attitudes and practices. In Greek myth, there is an explanation for intersex people with the story of an intersex god. The child of Aphrodite, so goddess of love, sex, beauty, Venus to the Romans, and Hermes is the messenger god. They had a child. Yeah, little wing boots. They had a child, and the child's name was Hermaphroditus, just combining the names together.
Oh, interesting.
As a young man, Hermaphroditus was bathing in a pool and was approached by a nymph. When he refused her advances and asked her to leave him alone, she attacked him because all these mythological creatures and gods are just
need to learn consent, dude. Damn.
Yeah, they have so many problems. But she wrapped herself around him so tightly that after the encounter, he then looked like a beautiful woman, but with male genitalia. Most of the gods of Mount Olympus would probably get described today as pansexual. Conversely, a handful of goddesses seem to be celibate and not interested in sex at all, like Athena, Artemis, Hestia. For the rest of the gods, though, they would have sex with pretty much anyone. Didn't matter who, and honestly,
anything.
As you mentioned, anything. It didn't matter what form as well. Zeus, king of the gods, disguised himself as a swan, an eagle, and even rain itself in order to continue his serial seductions and assaults on people.
Yes.
And his wife, Hera, she is constantly described as jealous, manipulative, duplicitous.
Yeah, because she's got a toxic ass fucking partner.
Yeah.
That's why.
She's always out to punish not Zeus for being a wandery, rapey horn dog, but yeah, exactly. But the mortal who was targeted by Zeus. So there's this weird, unhealthy power thing going on there that needs to be unpacked with like a really, really good therapist.
Right? Seriously.
But that also speaks to a prevailing attitude in ancient Greece towards gender roles and expectations in general, and well, women in particular. And so again, a lot of things for the actual real life culture is based in so much of their mythology. So let's talk about a couple of big topics that come up a lot when talking about the ancient Greeks. One of them is homosexuality, particularly between men, and then something called pederasty, which means lust for or love of, in a strong sexual sense, children, specifically boys. End quote. Before I continue, we all just had like the face of like, oh, gross.
You bringeth me my wine.
That's not very much.
Oh, thank you, kind sir.
You're welcome.
Cheers to you, Laurel. Cheers to you. All right. We
All right.
have, I am now upgraded from tea to wine. So here we are. You said Greeks, and I was like, damn, I need a glass of wine.
Yeah. Sometimes you need it for this topic. But, I know we all had that like, oh, reaction there with that quoted definition.
Yeah.
So before I continue, I know this gets a big knee-jerk reaction from our modern day sensibilities, and it should, honestly. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. We have a much better understanding of the human brain and psychology, how power dynamics work between people, consent. And so hopefully we know that this is not okay, what we're going to be talking about.
Right.
But it does make up a pillar of male Greek sexuality at this time, and it's really important to talk about.
Yeah.
So from early 6th century to the 4th century BCE, so we're looking at about 599 to 300 BCE, last few centuries of the ancient Greek era, pederasty seems to be rather prevalent. And if it helps you to know, dear listener, it went from rather prevalent to instantly like, nope, this is no good. This is not okay. We frown upon this. So that attitude does change. But because this is a sensitive subject, I want to make sure I keep my responsible history hat on, and also point out that this is something that very much gets discussed by scholars. Like, they talk about this. There's a lot of nuance with this subject. And because we really don't understand all of it, there's some debate about, was the relationship that sexual? What was the consent and the power dynamics like at that time? Was it sexual for only some or one side of it? What were the ideas of consent? So there's a lot of topics to discuss with that. And with all that in mind, I went to the professionals. I went to Professor Paul Cartledge from the University of Cambridge, who teaches ancient Greek culture. And he says in an interview with History Extra, quote, the relationship was between an adult male over the age of 20, which was called the erastes, meaning the lover, and a younger male, the eramenos, meaning the beloved. The erastes might be what you and I would call exclusively homosexual, but they also might be married to a woman as well. And that is, of course, not unknown in our society today, end quote. So it's a complicated relationship. There are a lot of rules and certain ways that it happened and that people went about it. There was a voting age in Athens, which was 18, but there wasn't an age of consent, though it seems that it's generally considered post-pubescent boys between 15 and 19. However, if the younger partner was forced or manipulated, coerced in any way, very strongly frowned upon.
Interesting.
I don't know if there's any sort of like, they talk about how strongly it was frowned upon and like there was a kind of a social shunning, but it didn't seem like there was any sort of legal action with that.
Yeah.
You could be a junior partner at 17 and be in a relationship with someone a few years older, which can also change and make that feel like maybe more of an equal footing because you're closer in age. In terms of what that relationship might look like, it was meant to be based in adoration, love, mutual respect, and mentorship. So that older partner would often mentor that younger partner in philosophy and civics and things like that, like these higher thought, debatable topics.
Yeah. This is what we were taught in high school, by the way, or at least one of my teachers did. Yeah.
Good.
About Sparta. We went like super deep into Sparta, and I remember I like looked at him and he's like, you guys are all giving me a look. We're like, yeah, we're all like emotionally disturbed now, but carry on.
Yeah, no, that's actually exactly what I'm about to say now, because when we look at the frequency of pederasty in ancient Greece, it's hard to say because you're looking at a collection of city-states, and each city-state has their own sort of
They're very
culture and
different.
vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, Athens and Sparta were
Rules and
two
customs.
totally separate.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
So when
yeah.
you're looking at Athens, based on historical evidence, it looks like there were some specific customs in place for it, but it was mostly confined to the wealthy elite.
Okay.
Whereas in Sparta, it was a rite of passage. It was part of a boy's educational cycle.
Mm-hmm.
There were protocols around the practice, and it had to be done, quote unquote, properly for that time. There were very specific rules in place. So whatever properly meant for them, that's how it was done. It was part of the growing up process. So that's that. But let's cut out the pederasty portion of things and look specifically at homosexuality and same-sex relationships between two partners of roughly the same age. Now, Athens, ancient Greece also starts with an A, wasn't really a utopia of gay freedom, which was sometimes thought about in, like, Oscar Wilde would say that about ancient Greece. It seems like it was more rare to have somebody roughly the same age. And it was especially less likely to find any historical evidence of women in same-sex relationships.
Yeah, that really wasn't a thing. Well, at least from what I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, or if, history recorded it and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because women didn't have the same freedoms as men did, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The heroes of Greek myths, like, real manly warrior types, right? Hercules, Achilles, for example, were written by various authors at the time to dress in women's clothing or have been raised disguised as a girl in order to dodge a draft into war. Hercules was also said to have had boyfriends and sexual relationships with other men in writings about him. So I mentioned Homer's The Iliad a little while ago, and this is a little more with that modern lens, but there is some speculation at the relationship between Achilles and his childhood friend Patroclus, or Patroclus. There we go. I've heard it said equally both ways. I might say it both ways throughout just for fun. Patroclus, Patroclus. I don't know. What are you going to get? Like a little mixed bag. We'll throw the dice each time. And the Iliad, which takes place during the Trojan War, centers on hero Achilles and his role in it. I mean, we've all seen Troy, right? I mean,
is that the one with Brad Pitt?
Brad Pitt, Orlando Bloom. They were the faces that launched 1,000 ships. Let me tell you.
Yeah,
2004. Yeah,
not Helen.
Troy. Not Helen.
It wasn't Helen.
It wasn't Helen. Yeah, Brad Pitt plays Achilles, and was Orlando Bloom? Was he Hector or was he? I don't even remember.
He was. Who's the dude who's
Paris?
Refuses to give up Helen?
Yeah, Paris.
Yeah, he plays Paris.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so back to the real Iliad. Now, if you're a listener who has any, like if you're a classic lit major, you might be a little annoyed that I even bring this up as an example, because it isn't overt, and of course, if it isn't overt, it's an explicit. Then we can't say, let's make some assumptions about this. There is certainly a gray area. But that being said, Patroclus is I keep wanting to say Hercules is Achilles' childhood friend and companion, and they are in this war together. And Patroclus is killed. Achilles is devastated, completely inconsolable, will not fight, drags his friend's killer, kills his friend's killer, attaches it to the back of his chariot, and drives around for days.
And drags it, yeah.
Gross.
Well,
now people read that and go, oh, he was really torn up about that. Were they lovers too? I mean, maybe.
I mean,
it wasn't unheard of for men in war to do that while away with the other men that they was fighting with. But side story, there's a fiction book by Madeline Miller called The Song of Achilles, which is a retelling of their story. Basically, it's kind of like the Iliad, where they actually have a relationship and it's made overt. And it's this big thing on Book Talk when people are said the memes are, he says, I love you, or he says ILY, but insert fictional man's name says ... And it's usually some like really flowery romantic line.
Oh,
Okay, but the one between Achilles and Patroclus is in this book is really good, and I just wanted to include it because it's so swoony. I'm gonna get my wine. You ready? When he says ILY, I love you, but Achilles once said, I would recognize you in total darkness, were you mute and I deaf. I would recognize you in another lifetime entirely, in different bodies, different times. And I would love you in all of this until the very last star in the sky burned out into oblivion.
I have heard that, but I think it was somebody else who quoted it, and I was like, damn, that's romantic as fuck.
I'm not romantic as fuck. That's why I was like, I am just going to include this in here just because y'all need to hear that. So that's from Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles, which I've had that on my book list forever, and I've not read it, but I did like Circe that she wrote. If anyone cares, hey, this is a book podcast now. So, anyway, what's that, dear listener? You're like, hey, Laurel. I'm like, yeah. What's up? How can I help you, friend? What about Sappho of Lesbos? I'm so glad you asked, history friend. So Sappho, sorry, I'm so stoned.
I can tell.
So Sappho is dubbed the 10th muse by Plato. And she was this prolific poet of this beautiful love poetry. And she lived on the island of Lesbos. Yes, which is where the word lesbian comes from. And it was strongly believed that Sappho was a lesbian herself and lived amongst many other women. And Sappho is really our only enduring symbol of lady on lady love from ancient Greece.
Oh.
Because women were not really allowed to be gay, although they certainly existed.
Yeah, and they also really weren't allowed out of the house, was my understanding. It was pretty...
Right.
It's a very male-dominated society.
Yes. And women were considered the property of men. So yeah, that was your job, is to stay home and raise babies, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Nice double standard you got there, ancient Greece. Anyway, gender roles. Yeah, well, speaking of double standards and gender roles, women, right, yeah, they weren't considered equal to men. They were property of their husband, and the place for them was in the home to be a baby making and baby breeding machine. You were there for reproduction and raising children. And in fact, just to tack this on, because of their second rate or even, I don't know, third rate status in ancient Greece, according to one of my sources, this was one of the reasons for pederasty. The idea that women were inferior beings and therefore unworthy of such like deep,
emotions,
wonderful
like love. Yep.
Yes, and passion and romance.
That's what they told us when we studied Sparta. They said something about men are for love, women are for children, or something like that. I was like, okay, then.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Fuck me then.
They want to feel those things anyway. Thanks, dicks.
It's not like I mattered anyway.
So bad. Yeah, it was essentially like, men, if you want to experience love, you got to get with another man.
But a younger one.
But a younger one. And I know that there's probably people who are listening. They're like, actually, yeah, if you do want to experience, like if you're gay, you're like, that makes sense, right? But yeah, it was women were just could not have that capacity for those sort of things and were undeserving of them. So that was why that
undeserving.
Yeah,
you wench, you are undeserving of love.
So sad.
Damn, dude, what a burn though.
Like, despite what the women's status was as a Greek citizen and the attitude towards women in general, there is evidence of some female sex workers having a certain level of independence, wealth, status within the city, because sex work flourished in ancient Greece, and sex workers were divided into two categories, which honestly looks a lot like a Venn diagram in some places. You know, the most common group of sex workers walked the streets or lived in a brothel. The women were also often enslaved, no freedom, and also really scary. It's a really scary and dangerous job because you didn't really have any other protection. The other sex worker was called, the English translation from the Greek was a friend, which later then became translated to courtesan. This is high class sex work. The women lived in their own houses or with maybe another couple of women. and they worked in granting favors and exchanging goods rather than being bought for a price. There's a little more
Interesting.
power dynamics that could happen there. So this level of sex worker was the manic pixie dream girl male fantasy for philosophers and writers at the time. Not only was she smoking hot, but she had a smoking hot brain too, that she was smart. And she could have discussions and debate about intelligent topics. Thing is, because of their public status, air quotes there, these women were looked down on while still having some sort of claim to their own power and whatever wealth they had. So basically, like Socrates is an example of this. There's a story of him and a couple of his philosopher friends, and they're sitting there and they're talking to this woman who, she's naked, she's gorgeous, but she's having this conversation with them. And so like, oh, we get to talk with you, but also, what's up? You know, you would think with all of this sex happening and the men of ancient Greece just going around having sex with just about anyone and everyone, that ladies are going to want to have some sort of contraception knowledge. And you'd be right. But they weren't always the most effective or safe. So, and in addition to the old classic pull-out method, coitus interruptus, as it's known.
What?
You pull out. That's its like formal, like scientific name.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm totally serious.
Oh shit! I thought you made that up. I was like, nice one, Laurel.
I'd be real proud of myself if I just like made that up on the spot. But another method was to use a plant called silphium, which was generally used for seasoning. It was like used in cooking, but then at some point they figured out that it might have some contraceptive benefits to it. At least that's what they thought about it. The barrier method was often used as well. So today for us, that would equate to IUDs, condom, diaphragm. But for, oh God, for ancient Greeks and Romans, it would be, sorry. As a woman, I'm going, oh no.
I'm just
wads
waiting
of
for
cloth,
it. Oh,
sea sponge, stones, and cloves of garlic.
what? You just like, do you crush the garlic and put it up there? Like what? Like, I'm really confused.
I know. I say cloves of garlic. I'm like, how many cloves? I mean, it's enough to create some sort of barrier. So I guess it's just whatever you need. But I don't want to think about that.
Cool.
It gets worse though. It gets worse.
Of course it does.
So
it always does.
Hippocrates, who is considered the father of Western medicine, prescribed a copper and saltwater concoction that would prevent pregnancy, maybe even up to a year. Gee, thanks, Hippocrates. If it doesn't kill you first, neither copper or saltwater are things that you want to ingest at all.
Oh, you drank it?
Yeah, I would assume so.
Heavy metal poisoning.
Yeah.
And not the good kind.
Other forms of contraception were also dubious in the reliability, and that was that women should hold their breath during sex, which I guess
better be quick then.
Better be quick, right? Because if you do one of those like little try to like not like run out of air, then you breathe. Does that cancel out the contraceptive effect? I don't know. But like, don't breathe for the entire time while you're having sex, and then sneeze, and you're like, what? Like, okay. So then sneeze, help expel semen out of your body, and then women should jump backwards 7 times.
What?
I know. Look, I'm not making these rules, but there they are. So there's ancient Greek contraception for you. And the same goes for Rome too, by the way. And so when we merged out of ancient Greece, it's considered to have ended with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE. And then not too terribly long after, ancient Rome comes along. And when we're looking at the history of ancient Rome, we typically think of the two iterations, I guess, of Rome. So the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. But before the Republic, between 625 and 510 BCE, they did have kings, which was known as the period of kings. Straightforward, right?
That would make sense.
And monarchs, yeah. Oh,
That checks
overall,
out.
yeah, right. Cool. Perfect name for it. Oh, shit's going wrong in the 3rd century. Just call it the crisis of the 3rd century. Let's just call it what it is. We don't need to get fancy. Period of Kings.
We're gonna make
Crisis,
this easy
yeah.
to understand.
Yeah. Thanks, Romans. And now overall, ancient Rome isn't that much different than the Greeks. Sex work is prevalent. Pederasty is still practiced. Attitudes towards same-sex relationships with both men and women were still the same. There were a lot of festivals that celebrated sexuality and or debaucherous behavior. Contraception methods were still the same, as I mentioned. And you can still find all kinds of erotic art on poetry, mosaics, paintings, literature, graffiti. In ancient Rome, there is some really famous dirty graffiti in Pompeii and Herculaneum, which you can still visit today. Are you familiar with the locations, Pompeii and Herculaneum?
I know Pompeii for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about if you asked me to show it to you on a map, I probably wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I had to look it up as well too, because I didn't. So it's the distant. Well, it's a town at the edge of Mount Vesuvius. So it's right between the volcano and the sea, or the Bay of Naples. I thought it was actually more on the outside edge, and Pompeii was closer to the sea, but it's vice versa. I had
it's the other way.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So Pompeii is a little more from the volcano, more southeast.
Mm-hmm.
And then Herculaneum is between the volcano. I've never said volcano in my entire life.
Well, you are today.
Said it twice. Between the volcano and the coast. So it's that little tiny narrow edge. Which I was like, oh, shit. So, so exactly. It's the Mount Vesuvius eruption in 79 CE that we're like, oh yeah, there's a lot of catastrophe and horror. And part of Roman culture was this idea that you're leaving your mark, you're leaving your legacy, leaving your mark on the world and being remembered. And so graffiti, complete with the author's name inscribed with it, you get the thing, you get the name, you know exactly who you're getting it from. It was a way literally to just leave your marks on the world. The art might be slanderous in nature, might be a way to show off an author's intellect and wittiness with jokes.
Roman Banksy.
Like, what does it mean? Don't understand.
Oh my God.
You could also find it in brothels in what might equate to a 5-star Yelp review, right? Like,
hell yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Lucinda does this thing with her tongue, and you will see the gods and erupt like the nearby mountain or something, you know? Is it too soon to make a Vesuvius joke?
I mean, at this point, man, we're already this far in. You might as well just.
Ooh. Yikes! No, that's not a real example. That was just in my head. Just then, that just fell out. Some were declarations like this.
Fell right out on the floor.
Actual graffiti, and I personally liked it. Here goes, quote. Oh, I love it. Makes me laugh. Weep, you girls. My penis has given you up. Now it penetrates men's behinds. Goodbye, wondrous femininity.
What is that?
The drama of it is so good.
Oh my God. What
Weep, you girls. Like, my glorious dick is no longer on the menu. Weep, you girls. It sounds like
time to find some different Italian sausage. You know what I'm saying?
Now it penetrates men's behinds. I love that. Erotic drawings and words were inscribed all over the towns, as well as in the bathhouses. Here we go. Settle on in. Roman bath. Oh boy,
this is where you and I are going to overlap, is in these bathhouses, Laurel.
This is it. Here we go. I'm going to pass this little torch here.
We're going to see each other in the steamy rooms.
To the haze, and we're like, hey, what's up? You good? Yeah, cool, awesome. I'll see you later. Can't imagine that Roman baths were, I don't know, they were lavish, but can't imagine that they were like nice. I'm just thinking like the water's kind of slimy or something. I don't know.
Maybe.
Dirty.
I don't know, because they had the aqueducts bring clean water all the time, so they probably weren't that bad. We've
Okay,
got Roundup in our water today, so really, which would you rather have?
that's true. So the Romans were famous for their lavish bathhouses. During the time of the Roman Empire, bathhouses could be found all over the empire.
Everywhere.
Yeah, in fact, Katie, there's a town in England called Bath.
I've been
Yeah.
there.
What's there?
Bathhouses, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
The only thing is like when you walk through them, obviously the shit's really old, right? Let's just start there. There's stalactites and stuff in all of the like pools. And like it's not like there's no like running water anymore. It's all just stale sitting water and shit like that. And I'm like, bro, why didn't you guys upkeep this? We could all still be bathing in here today. That's what I said. And everyone looked at me like I was a weirdo. And I was like, no, seriously, like this shit could be nice, but you chose to just let it fall by the wayside. Like throw an aqueduct in here. It can't be that hard. They did it back in the day. What's your excuse? I just thought it was a wasted opportunity. You could bathe where the ancients once did. Oh.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts, but I'm not like I'm not an architect or a historical.
Oh, that's true. It could be not structurally sound.
I think, like, yeah, I was gonna say, I
didn't think about that.
The beauty of it, as well as maybe structural soundness, might be something that is. But hey, I like the way you think. You know what? Why don't you just recreate the experience, like across the street or something like that?
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, there's an excellent sandwich shop there as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
nice.
And lots of sheep.
Oh, I bet.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And because of how far the spread of the empire and their baths were all over Europe, even after the fall of the Roman Empire, roughly 476 CE, that's debated, public bathing still remained popular across the continent. They're like, we're going to keep up with this bathing stuff because this is nice. I love this. And the public bath has become synonymous with sexy, erotic encounters because of the nudity. And it's also thought that the heat of the water would heat your passions. Like you're a little amorous teapot.
Right?
I'm a sexy teapot, sure. Stuff like sitting in the water. Ooh, like what? I don't know. Anyway, but the heat would heat you up. And speaking once again to the erotic art and graffiti, it was all over the place in bathhouses with explicit sex scenes of people getting it on in all the different kinds of ways. And so I get it. I mean, the correlation makes sense. They're sitting there.
Yeah, it's not a far jump.
Yeah. But the beginning and the end, the bookends of the Roman Empire, marked two interesting changes in sexuality. Rome went from a republic to an empire with the rule of Augustus. We talked about this briefly in Zenobia. And one of the laws he enacted regarded sexuality and morality. He was like really worried about the extravagance and the adultery that was happening in the upper classes. And so he's like, well, let's enact some laws on marriage and reproduction and just morality in general. And the laws all revolved around what men could do to their daughters or their wives if they were found cheating or for different infractions. And then also we're giving prizes, monetary prizes and gifts for those couples who produced offspring. So they're like, our birth rates are going down. Less people are getting married and having kids, and people are just having too much of a wild good time. So we're going to put some laws in place. And you may have also noticed that all the punishments applied to women.
Women, not men.
And not
That's
men.
Exactly what I was sitting here. I was like,
yeah.
Right, but wait, I'm sorry. Who was allowed to run around and do whatever they wanted, though?
Yeah. The other bookend of the Roman Empire is the rise of Christianity, which happened roughly 400 CE to 1000 CE. And all the sexuality was kiboshed.
Yep.
Masturbation, oral sex, anal sex, homosexuality, contraception, adultery, all deemed sinful, banned, often punishable by death, depending on what that was. Sex became reduced down to pretty much like if you're not doing it to try and make a baby, then
It's sin.
like, yeah, then you don't
Pretty
do it because
much,
you're
that's
enjoying
it.
yourself, and you shouldn't enjoy yourself. Like,
Yep.
And so sexuality really became loaded with a lot of fear because now there's eternal repercussions for anything that's
Damnation.
and more like, what, you can go to hell, girl? What?
Hmm?
You could do that? Eternal damnation? No, thank you.
Exactly.
I'm good. And so that concludes my half of the history of sex. And Katie, go from there.
It's my turn.
Spinderella cut it up one time. We are talking about sex in the smoke circle today. I hope you guys have all been having a great time, learning a few new things. Holy Toledo, I know that I sure have. Probably more than I would want to know about. But here we all are on this journey together, and we are so glad you're here with us. If you liked what you've heard so far, please subscribe, follow, whatever it is on the platform that you are listening on. If you really like us, please rate, review. Those are all amazing things that help our little podcast move up in the charts, get heard and seen by more people who like history with a fun twist, like you. Maybe share this episode with a friend or on social media. And speaking of social media, please join the online smoke circle, where you can keep up with us the other days of the week when we're not here with you for an episode. Over on Instagram, for example, we're sharing news about the show, little bits of history, as well as history one-hitters, which are short little videos about something that we learned about and wanted to share with you, our history friends. All of our social media accounts are directly linked in the show notes or the show description down below, so just scroll down there and you can find us on whatever social media platform is your favorite. Up next, Katie finishes ancient cultures in Asia and then takes us into the Middle Ages. Ooh, you can just smell it now. I know you're just so eager to get there. So without further ado, let's puff pass it on to part 2.
Yeah, you had like quite the sticky big bit. Wait, hold on. Fuck me. Okay. I'm so happy we're doing this episode, dude. I'm so happy we're doing this episode. I can't even tell you. Oh, all right. Passing the torch.
Here we go.
Thank you. So we start in the bathhouses, right? So I'm going to wave to you momentarily, and we're going to head backwards a little bit, and then we'll meet again in the bathhouses.
Oh, nice.
We will end there.
I'll just be sitting there. I'll just be having a little smoky smoke and just like letting myself be all warm and cozy.
As I stated earlier, when you and I were discussing, any species needs 3 things to survive and thrive in this world: food, water, reproduction. Bare minimum necessary for survival, right? Yes, I know I'm taking broad strokes out. What about safety and blah, blah? Yeah, we know. So, well, the necessity for survival of the species in some cultures went above and beyond a simple task. For a lot of cultures, it was art, and even sometimes a religious ideal, right? Not the Christians, though. Many ancient cultures believed that sexual practices were often intertwined with spirituality, and it was frequently linked, this is what I was speaking about with you earlier, with the worship of gods and goddesses. So the act of these things in the name of, insert God's name here, God or goddess's name here, is the act of fertility, is a holy thing to do, right? I think even like there's a lot of, I can only speak for some because I'm not well versed on everything, but there's a lot of like gods and goddesses that are fertile. Like I thought someone even said, like, on the lower end of responsibilities, I think even Thor is like a fertility god. And I was like, really? I mean, he carries a hammer, so you know, he may be the more robust end of fertility, we might say. So. And that brings us to the Kama Sutra, because this is episode 69, and you can better believe it that this was coming your way.
Yeah, here we go.
I hope our family skips this episode. So a book known by most people as a book of sexual positions, it is actually more than that. It's not just a checklist of complex exercises for the bedroom, which probably would leave me with a bad back. I'm telling you. the older I get. The closer I get to 30, the worse this gets. So the words Kama Sutra actually loosely translate to concept in which desires bond or suture, as another word, so bond or suture, the world together. Right?
I love it.
Very spiritually based. The sexual aspect of the text is actually only a portion of what the Kama Sutra covers. It talks about such things as how to obtain a wife, how to keep a wife, how a wife should behave, and where concubines fit into the puzzle of marriage. What? I didn't put it in there. That's just what they said, man. So, Kama, not just the rup, in a broad sense of what it can mean is affection, love, and even wishes, all of which does not explicitly have to do with sexuality. A part of maybe, but not like, oh, that immediately means this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It has broader uses in life. The text ends in a discussion of the inner power that an individual can harness when engaging in the spiritual act, right? Sexual intercourse. But it can enhance one's own sexual power. Like it almost like brings you more like power and like longevity and stuff like that. Very interesting. There was a lot more to it than what I thought, because I figured it was, I figured it had something to do with it, but I thought like maybe it was like a pleasure book. Like I didn't know. Like I was like, oh, I'm sure it talks about all that and like, what to do when and blah blah blah, but it has a lot more going on than that.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was believed to be written around the second-ish century during the Gupta Empire, and many scholars question the morality, however, of the text, as it discusses seducing another man's wives. So it was written by one person, and they think that maybe he was pushing some personal agendas, is kind of what they were saying, or that his own opinions and agendas were in it, right? So, it still adhered to a lot of social responsibility and what was expected within marriage and stuff at the time. But still, his own opinions, that's what they were saying is, yeah, his opinions are still in here, though. Like, who were you talking about with Rome and the dude blatantly, like, contradicts himself all the time?
Oh, was it Tacitus or Cassius
Something
Dio?
like that, yeah.
Yeah, one of
so
the historians.
Not that bad, but they did say, like, in certain aspects of this, they're like, well, that would not have been socially acceptable at the time. To like be seducing another man's wife. You'd be like,
yeah, fisticuffs for sure. Yeah.
You understood where I was going with that. So the Gupta Empire is often regarded as a Renaissance-ish era for India. That's kind of just the word I picked out for it. It was a time of a lot of art, literature, philosophy, and architecture was developed. So it was a very that's why I likened it to the Renaissance, like the Italian Renaissance, where we get a lot of art, architecture in Italy at the time and all that stuff. So, and again, that was in the earlier centuries. So we're talking like 300 CE, 400 CE. So it's not new. The Kama Sutra is made up of 7 books, each one discussing a different form of pleasure through which a person can achieve kama, goals, aspirations, pleasure, whatever. A common misconception is that every single part of the 7 sections in this book dictate positions of sexual intercourse, when it is in fact only one small section. Of those 7, it's one itty-bitty little spot of the Kama Sutra. In reality, it is more actually about achieving love and pleasure in relationships and in life. So,
I love
it's a little how-to book, yeah.
But sex sells, right? So that's what people are going to latch on to, and they're going to be like, look, there's tits.
Hell
look,
yeah.
They're doing it.
Oh, there's tits, man.
Yeah.
And all kinds of other things as well.
TNA.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Tits and ass.
Oh. It's me. I was like, what? I thought that was like a not safe for work thing or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, what else?
Isn't that what they, I don't know. That's what I say. If there's like a new series I started watching or whatever, if I'm recommending it to someone, I'd be like, lots of TNA. There you go.
There's TNA, man.
Got some TNA.
Well, this episode, TNA warning. Good. I'm so glad you're high. You're going to giggle your way through all of this. Oh, prepare yourself. So we are now going to go to the Middle Ages. I will meet you in your bathhouse soon. Give me a couple 100 years. We'll get
Okay.
there.
All right.
So, the Middle Ages. Here we go. We have arrived.
I smell it already.
Monty Python is coming in with his little coconuts. Yep. So much of what we, as modern day people, have assumed about sexuality in the Middle Ages is in fact not quite what it would seem. There is an influence of the church, of course, in the Middle Ages, but a lot of us, I think, me included, I won't speak, for you, but I would think of it as a time of sexual repression through fear of sin. Right? Comment. That's pretty much what we would assume. It's not an unfounded claim. Definitely did happen, but Christian ideologies were not like the only say here. It did influence attitudes towards sex, but there was also the influence of medical medicine, like medieval medical medicine. So, like, dude, this is gonna get wild. Just prepare yourself.
Okay.
So there's a French cleric. Arnaud is what I call him. His full name is Arnaud de Verneuil. Sorry, Frenchies. I did my best, but I took German. We called them Frenchies. We were the Germies and they were the Frenchies in school. That's what we called each other.
Germies.
I know. There's one kid who spoke Sperman because if he didn't know how to say something in German, he'd say it in Spanish. So he's like, well, it's Sperman. And she's like, that doesn't count here, Tony. I hope he's doing well. He was a riot.
Damn it, Tony.
Oh, dude. Tony was keeping us all alive through the art of humor. So the French cleric, Arnaud, he illustrates the sophistication of medieval sexuality. One day in the early 14th century, right? So here we are in the 1300s. Arnaud was a student. He had sex with a prostitute. Several years later, he confessed to this lapse in his inquisition, explaining that after he committed his sin, his face began to swell. Therefore, he contributed that to his punishment for his sin. Oh, girl.
The audacity.
I know. So Arnaud's tale is not unusual at the time, though, right? Maybe not the best of hygiene around this time. And also, we did not know a lot medically. That's where I'm going to go with this, right? So, yeah. Many medieval men found themselves with undesirable symptoms after a brothel visit and attributed their plight to their sexual deviance. Some became leprous immediately after the late 12th century visit to a prostitute. Much has been made of the medieval tendency to interpret disease as a product of sexual sin, which, I mean, is a fair thing because you're told not to do these things out of the bounds of marriage, bad things happen to you. That's a pretty easy line to draw. I get it. I don't blame them. So, well, this is a good time for you to be high for all of this.
Yeah.
So while the church held sway, there's still medical concerns and opinions that prevailed as well, especially when concerns over the sexual transmission of disease began to arise, and many medical doctors at the time were trying to take a rational approach. So they, like, the church would say something, they'd be like, okay, but what are we going to do to curb this? Because, being medical doctors as they were, as much as they could be at the time, they were like, you're not going to stop people from banging. It's not going to happen. People are sinful, lustful beings. Like,
happens.
Yeah, right. So they're like, so we need to actually take steps to, like, look at this and be like, what can we do to treat this, stop the spread, whatever. Right? The medieval CDC, what are we going to do? So here we are. They're all sitting around the table. There's the Knights of the Round Table, and then there's the
God.
CDC medieval table. They're all struggling. They all have their doctor's masks on, hopefully.
Yeah.
Or something of the sort. So sometimes, for example...
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. No, because they didn't even know that germs existed.
That's true. So that comes more plaguey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Closer to, like, the 1500s? Yeah. That's what I thought. Well, they're sitting around discussing things. They're like, what are we going to do? Brothels. How are we going to handle this? So
I say everybody lick everything all the time. Let the ghosts out of your blood and put some leeches on
and
it.
And then put some leeches on. Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Open a vein. Oh my god.
We'll get there. That comes up. Don't you worry. Sometimes local authorities took preventative actions, right? Trying to stop the spread of these things because it did kind of become a problem. And they set up regulations in a town called Southwark.
Southwark?
Southwark, excuse me.
Southwark is what it looks like?
Yeah.
Southwark. Yeah.
Southwark. They banished women with what they called burning sickness. Modern day people think it was probably gonorrhea, the scholars who have looked at it. They banished them from the local stews. They were called stews instead of brothels. So you just go stew around with your burning women. Yes.
Vegetable.
They also discussed how a woman could have intercourse with a leper and be unharmed. But after intercourse with another man, he would then become a leper himself. Literally what they thought, right? So here we just listen.
Okay.
You probably came across this, how they didn't like bad smells back in the day. They associate it with disease and illness.
Right.
So they said oh man, here we go. The seed of the leper would rest in her womb, would putrefy and get disgusting. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I read that too.
Uh-huh. And then as soon as the heat of his body would like activate it, he would then contract it because it was like putrid and terrible. So, right. So there we go.
Putrid.
That was literally putrefy. And doth I quote, disgusting.
Yeah.
Fortunately for Arnaud, our filthy little monk that he was, or whatever, cleric. Yeah, he was a cleric. And many others, it is often possible to treat sexually transmitted leprosy. Good news, good news. In 14th century, English physician named John of Gaddesden? Yup. Suggested several protective measures that a man should take after having sexual relations with a woman he believed to be leprous. He should cleanse his penis as soon as possible, either with his own. That's the first time we said penis in episode 69 by like an hour and so in. We finally got there. Penis. So, all right. So he should cleanse it as soon as possible, either with his own urine or vinegar and water. Scrub that wink. Scrubbing that winky. Then he should undergo intensive bleeding by a phlebotomist, of course. It's always the bleeding. Followed by a 3-month course of purgation, ointments, and medication.
Oh my god. Okay.
It gets so much worse. Hang in there. Now we're going to go to the surgical one. Such preparations were undoubtedly unpleasant, but the surgical remedies recommended around the same time by the English surgeon John of Ardern were downright brutal. Prepare yourselves. The Winkies are in danger. Ardern treated his unfortunate individual by cutting away the dead flesh with a blade, then applying quicklime, a process that must have been extremely painful but apparently yielded good results. So they cut you and they cauterized you, essentially. It fucking worked, apparently. I was like, whoa! Holy cow. Holy leprosy. Yes, what's up, man? Talk to me.
Isn't quicklime, because I'm just holding my face, I just don't even know. I'm like, oh my god. Isn't quicklime what gets used by like gangsters and cleanup crews in movies and stuff to like
probably
disintegrate a body?
It's calcium oxide. It's a
or is that the stuff that they use to clean? Well,
it's in the production of iron, steel, paper, and pulp production, treatment of water and flue gases in the mining industry. So, but it might be the same stuff.
Okay.
But it's not normal lime. It's a little different from like lime. There's lime and then there's quicklime. So they are separate, just so you know.
Okay.
But that's what they use to cauterize you. Okay. Is that what if it was easy to get, Laurel? Probably.
Okay.
It didn't say, though. It just said that it was used as a cauterizing agent in this case.
Sounds right. Okay.
On your winky.
Jeez.
Oh, yes. Medieval physicians saw too much sex as a real concern. Conventional wisdom held that several noblemen died of sexual excess.
Oh,
Apparently.
like a heart attack mid shag kind of thing?
I guess so. It just said, so as an example of this, a 12th century French nobleman had recently married his third wife when he fell seriously ill. During his convalescence,
Mm.
he was advised by his physician to abstain from intercourse, right? But disregarding this warning, he did it anyway. When the doctor detected from Ralph, his name was Ralph, Ralph's urine that he had done so, he advised him, prepare yourself, to set his house in order, for he would be dead within 3 days, a prognosis that proved accurate. That fucking doctor's sniffing pee. How else would he know? Unless he had some sort of chemical reaction, but I don't know. It didn't go into it. It just said that it proved true and he died. I was like, whoa.
That's wild.
I know.
Well,
I wish it had gone into like what it was that killed him, but
yeah,
I know. So, too much sex is bad. According to medieval understandings of the body, based on the system of the 4 humors, right? This is where their medicine revolved around: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, all of which sound disgusting. These men's behaviors presented problems. The humor systems derived from the idea that the health was based on an equilibrium of the humors, right? Keep them even. And that illness is a product of imbalance. Which, I mean, imbalances in life, I suppose. On the other hand, medieval medical authority held that too little sex also presented a medical problem. Can't have too little, can't have too much, you gotta get it just right. Celibacy was potentially detrimental to your health, particularly for young men. Long-term celibacy meant retention of excess semen, which could affect the heart, which in turn could damage other parts of your body. So those embarking in celibacy might experience symptoms such as headaches, anxiety, weight loss, and in most serious cases, death. You'll die.
Full of too much semen.
That's what I said. I was like, holy shit.
So what would they say about like monks?
We're getting there. Okay. Although most famous cases of death by celibacy were related to male clerics, women were, in their own way, equally vulnerable to this medical problem. According to contemporary medical theory, both sexes produced seed that was necessary for conception, which is not far off, so they got something right. And just like semen, the female seed needs to be expelled from the body during regular sexual intercourse. Now, it doesn't work like that, but what do I know? So, in a woman who was not sexually active, the seed would be retained within her body. As it built up, it would cause suffocation of the womb. Suffocation. Indeed.
Okay. So they're not like, I mean,
they are not prudes.
Yeah. Well, there's also like the tiniest bit of understanding of maybe what might happen, except
again, we're hitting where you were in life, where they understand it like spiritually and like as a mode for reproduction, blah, blah, blah. And then we're getting to maybe we sort of understand some sort of medicalness. There's a seed of medical realness here.
Yeah. I mean, like seed cycles, I'm like, okay, they're centering it in a different light, but you're figuring it out. Yeah.
Right. So you're starting to see the more of a modern idea of looking at it. So monks basically were told they did bleeding. They bled a lot because it would cause them to not have as many nightly emissions.
Okay.
Yes.
Nightly emissions.
That's what they called it. So, yeah, I got the good one, man.
You did. You really did. I'm so glad. I think I get like a fun time with the Victorians in part 2, but
you're gonna have a ball.
Yeah.
So it's no secret that the medieval world is a lot less clean than ours, and they feared bad smells, like we discussed earlier. They believed that disease was often spread through foul smells, and they called it the miasma. Sounds very spooky, right? So they did things to try and help themselves smell a little better, right? They were well aware, as we would be today, of how rank they were.
Right. Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's not, they were not like, oh, that's normal. They noticed.
Yeah.
So they would do things like chew cardamom or licorice to keep their breath smelling sweet. But bathing on a regular basis was difficult because hopefully, I mean, if you live by running water, great, you can bathe daily. But if you don't, where are you going to go? You know, think about sitting in the middle of a village. Where are you going to get that water? You know, you barely probably have enough to do your cooking or whatever.
Mhm.
So that would require a bathhouse facility. The Romans were well known for their
There they
bathhouse
are.
facilities, and these were available to the common man, right? It was very popular, like we discussed, everywhere. Until the church was like, maybe not.
Yeah.
They were not into all of us bathing together, those absolute killjoys. So, unlike the Christians, the Jews, the Muslims, and the Buddhists made bathing a priority. A holy body is a clean body, and a lot of them still believe that today, which I do too. So here we are. I can second that. Bathing for ceremonial purposes is also practiced widely in medieval India, and that from there spread to Tibet, to China, to Japan with the spread of Buddhism. That followed through. So those cultures were actually considered a little cleaner. So as far as I could tell, what I got from them was bathing was important, right? It's just the
Yeah.
Christians who were stinky. So during the Crusades, the Arabian author of 1001 Nights was frankly appalled by the hygiene or lack thereof within his Christian counterparts, right?
Yeah.
Stating that after their baptism and symbolic cleansing at birth, they did not feel the need to bathe for the rest of their lives.
Gross.
Right? So coming back from the Crusades, the, you know, returning soldiers and whatnot brought with them better bathing habits and perfume. Big one, right? Bathhouses became more common. Are you okay?
Sorry. Yeah. I was just having the thought of like, oh my God, could you imagine your man goes off to the Crusades? Not only does he come back, but he comes back like cleaner, like smelling better,
Smelling nice.
understanding
cologne.
bathing, uses cologne, and he's like
a better version than when he left.
Now.
Yeah. They did discuss that while
I've
the
seen
soldiers,
things, but yeah.
Yeah. They did discuss that while the soldiers were away on the Crusades, they were expected to partake of celibacy. And that they said that like doctors were consulted and they were like, well, you shouldn't die from it. It shouldn't be that long. You should make it. As long as you get back and get having sex as soon as possible, you should be okay. So
wow.
But it was not acceptable for them to necessarily visit a brothel tent, a stew tent.
Stew tent.
I don't know what they
call it. A
call
little kettle of stew. Sit in the middle of the campground.
I'm gonna go visit the stew.
Kettle.
I'll be back. Look out for the burning women. So
burning women.
I know.
Oh,
I know. I know. It sounds so uncomfortable. And so around this time, the church kind of backed off for a little bit, and bathhouses came back into style again. That also, like Laurel said, included the sultry bathhouses, these stews, as we shall call them. And there were ladies who, nothing to do with bathhouses, but in general, they were laundresses. So they did like laundry and whatnot of the day. They were very poor peasants, didn't have a lot of money. So these laundresses often supplemented their income with sex work. So because lavender, which came back from the Crusades, grows everywhere, is easy to come by, you did laundry with it a lot. So these laundresses often smelled of lavender when they were performing their duties in the stews. So this is why when I texted you earlier in the week and we were just dying laughing and I said we're going to giggle our way through all of episode 69, the scent of lavender became a scent closely associated with the scent of, and I quote, a whore and a laundress.
A strumpet.
Yes, a strumpet. So sadly, after the 16th century, bathhouses were again out of style. The church comes back down on that again, is like, no, 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 and no again. As we know, 1500s, outbreaks of plague, everyone's general lack of hygiene, and that kind of stayed until around the 18th century, which will lead us into next episode with what you were talking about. I do have a parting statement here, though. When it came to sex, medieval people faced a dilemma: how to preserve vital bodily equilibrium without exposing themselves to either disease or sin. The decline of the humoral medicine and changes in religious belief have removed some of the anxieties faced by Arnaud and other medieval people. So they weren't prudes, basically, like we were thinking. It was very important to have a very balanced sexual diet, we shall say. Just like eating your vegetables.
Yeah. Your eggplants and your zucchinis. We are going to be picking up with like enlightenment, post-enlightenment for part 2 and heading through the modern day and covering cultures and attitudes.
Nay, dear listener, this is not the end.
This is not the end. Oh, we are not hitting it on this note. We are getting it all the way through to what we know today. But we're going to do it all again in a couple of weeks. Hope you guys have had a great time.
We sure did.
We did. We had all the good times. Yeah. Double wink there. Good times. Had by all in the smoke circle. And we're going to do it again in a couple of weeks for part 2 of the history of sex. In the meantime, folks, get money, get high, give love, and
listen, I hope you smell of lavender tonight.
Lavender oil. Get that lavender oil, you sexy history strumpets, you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.